United States Olympic Committee Training Design Symposium. 2008, Bill Sands, Ph.D. Evaluation. This original lecture was about an hour and 40 minutes, and these are audio notes from that lecture. Why and what are we concerned about? Training design and plan. To predict and thereby control the future. Annan's law of strategy. Strategy is when you keep right on firing even though you're out of ammunition, in the hope no one will notice. Evaluation has an image problem and is considered nerdy, especially if you're interested in measurement. Moneyball, the movie, has helped change this along with Facebook, YouTube, Google, that is, metrics and analytics. Most coaches like to control workouts and are people-oriented. Hyper preparedness is the key for the highest levels. Coach must know where we are and how we're going to get there, and or where we are going. That is, future of sport and event. Flap versus roll in the high jump. No mechanical advantage for flap. However, flap is easier to learn for high jumpers. Coaches do not want to be trapped in past. That is, new technologies of competition may beat your team. Must be student of sport in every sense. Cross-pollination can happen if coaches network with other coaches. So I want to point out one or two things in that last discussion there. The flap versus the roll. I think that was in 1968 in the Mexico Olympics, actually. Fosbury flap. Anyhow, the idea that there's no mechanical advantage for the flap versus the roll is a huge concept. And the second concept, flap is easier to learn for high jumpers. So I point that out because there may be one way or the other in terms of one being a better way to learn something. And so coaches and teachers have to keep that in mind with regard to how we're approaching our teaching process. One teaching process may be easier to learn than the other. So that, that's like hugely important. How do you learn what you need to know? Coaches must determine crucial factors, study sport and event history, analyze historical data for trends to predict future performance, examine current performance for possible future trends, and determine your current status. That is, where are you now? How much can an athlete improve percentage-wise in 1 year? United States Olympic Committee describes athletes as top 8 in world, or world-class athletes as top 8 in world. Coaches believe elite athletes can improve about 1 to 3% per year. Non-elites, which is also akin to world-class or top 8 in the world, will improve faster because there is no more room for improvement. Or non-elites will improve faster because there is much more room for improvement. Examples of measurement. Track and field shows trends over about 100 years and predictions for future performance. Examples show a trend of performance leveling off over time, except for shot put. Shot put performances have gotten worse. Around 1980, track and field either levels off or gets worse. That is, shot put got worse. Historical trends may determine percentage of improvements for quad, Olympic quad. What if your sport doesn't use stopwatches or tape measures? VO2 max for gymnasts have shown no improvements in the last 50 years. However, strength has improved and may be reason for sports improvements in gymnastics and many other sports. Strength delays fatigue, injuries, etc. The point is to measure what is important for your sport, and that's a really important concept too, just that last statement there. The point is to measure what is important for your sport, meaning coaches need to know what the critical factors are, critical features of their sport are, and when we are able to measure those, now we have a better opportunity for developing more effective training designs. Coaches could measure volumes, intensities, how many competitions, etc. Has athlete development changed? Modern athletes over-compete and under-train. That is, annual volumes of training have decreased while annual volumes of competitions have increased. That's a really extreme extremely important topic as well in the era of, and this is not necessarily ideal, but in the era of when at all costs, many coaches, athletes, and volunteer stakeholders and parents believe that if you compete more, you're actually going to get better. And the reality is modern athletes over-compete and under-train. So the amount of competitions has actually gone up, which, if it's kind of like tug of war, and you've got to think of it that way. If we compete more, how can we train more? There's only the constant there is time. You have the same amount of time every day or week or month or year. So if you increase one by the nature of math, you've got to decrease the other. Does that make sense? So if you over-compete, you may actually undertrain in the early developmental years, let's say from like 10 through 14. If you undertrain and overcompete, you'll get good at competing, but you may not technically be proficient. And that's something where I'm actually trying to change in terms of coaches education, parent education, and athlete education. Classic versus annual periodization was not designed for current length of competition season. That is, classic periodization is dead. Because of increasing competitions, we must design new periodization models. Senior and many junior athletes nurse injuries or have surgeries in off-season versus completely resting, recovering, and regenerating. That is, most athletes prepare for competitions year-round versus developing fitness technique, recovering in the off-season. So the preparation phase is in the classic periodization, there's typically 3 or 4 different phases. One of them is the transition, and that's the time when you actually rest, recover, and regenerate. And what he's saying is that kind of has gone away, and most people are staying in the preparation phase much longer because they don't have time to take a rest because of the increase in competitions. Most athletes don't have an off season. It's possible to prepare more patiently, emphasize long-term development, keep athletes around till they're in their 40s. Plan competitions more carefully. Teach athletes new sports. Example, speed skating and cycling. Triathletes. And those examples are not necessarily really spelled out. And MMA could be classified as that too, where people in MMA have come from a variety of different sports, and a lot of wrestlers in the last, let's say, 20 years have gotten into that sport in past their 30s, and they've become champions. Speed skating and cycling are an example that's been going on, I'd say, for the last 30 or 40 years, where a lot of cyclists and speed skaters, they go back and forth between sports. In fact, there have been several Olympians and medalists that have medaled in both speed skating and cycling. And triathletes, recently, you've got more people that are specializing in triathletes. In fact, when I was at the Olympic Training Center, they had triathletes there that were, I was a resident athlete, they had triathletes there that were 17, 18, 19, and 20. In the beginning, though, there were a lot of triathletes that came from track and field, or they came from swimming, or they came from cycling, and then they got into the sport past their 20s and early 30s. So that's actually still happening now. But I guess the point there is teach athletes new sports where they would be able to, transition into other sports because of whatever kind of base they have. And those are the examples of MMA, speed skating, cycling, and triathletes. Paradigm shift. Blocked training. That is, do not train concurrently. Train in sequence. Follow this sequence. Basic abilities, more specific abilities, tapering, competitions. A higher arch of preparation is needed for elite level development or long-term development. Classic block training may work, except it takes too long for today's modern training and competition demands. Modern block training, accumulate fitness form, transmute, change, or alter fitness form, realize fitness form. This model is for top 8 in the world or elite athletes who require small improvements, that is, not novices. And I guess that's a big point too. If you've listened to any of these audio notes, several times they've suggested there's different type of development and or training and or designs based on age, skill, and some people call it athletic IQ and or training age. So a novice would not necessarily have the same training design as an elite athlete, just because they're going to be different skill levels for the most part. One's going to be advanced, one's not going to be advanced. So the advanced person is not ever probably going to do the same things as a novice, and it should be vice versa. But keeping that in mind, I'm pointing it out because a lot of coaches and athletes and parents may not understand that concept, and they want to do the same thing that the high schooler's doing or the college person's doing or the professional's doing, when in fact you've got to base training design on maturity level, skill level, age, weight, and there are a lot of other factors. Developing athletes or novices must prepare longer. Block model. Each phase should build on last phase. Even this model takes 3 to 6 weeks, but includes competitions. If you prepare well, you may not need many competitions. I'm going to read that one again because that's ridiculously important. If you prepare well, you may not need many competitions. Eliminating tournaments is key for long-term development and productivity for athletes. Know your athletes. Bondarchuk claims if you continue to improve for 20 prep periods or preparation periods, you will be Olympic champion. 15 prep periods, high national team to low international. 10 prep periods, national level. Less than 10 prep periods, less than national level. This model is for track and field and based of 2 prep periods per year or 10 years. In other words, he's suggesting that it's not based on the amount of competitions. It's not based on how many wins or losses you have, although those are important. It's based on the hours and or prep periods of training that you've had. In track and field, typically they've got an indoor season and an outdoor season, so they can get 2 preparation periods per year. And to broaden it out even further, the preparation period is a part of a periodization plan. Typically there'll be a preparation period in if you've got 3 phases: preparation period, competition period, and then a transition period, which is the off season. And some periodizations have preparation period, pre-comp period, competition period, and then a transition. So depending on who you're talking to, there's 4 or 3 phases of a periodization plan. And again, he's saying you need, greater than 20 to be world class and or top 8 in the world, all the way down to less than 10, which means you're going to be less than the national team. This model is similar to 10,000 hours of training for mastery of sport. That is, 10 years training equals 10,000 hours of mastery of sport. Wealth, culture, popularity, region also help determine achievement of goals. In other words, depending on where you are in the world, your sport may or may not be as popular, so you can become a much better, let's say, swimmer in this country as opposed to Mexico, as an example. We have a long history of track and field and swimming and basketball, by the way, so it may not necessarily take 10,000 hours in those particular sports in the USA, although it might, and it may take longer in a country like Mexico where the sport is not as popular and they don't have that type of culture. That region of the world does not support it, and the wealth of the country sometimes has a factor on who actually achieves per sport. Going in the wrong direction may lead to mediocrity, or worse, that is, conspiracy of circumstances. Example: breakups of boyfriend-girlfriend, injuries, bad plans, etc. all create mediocrity or worse. Once you know what it is, you can measure it. Challenge may be to discover what it is or what to measure. A lot of factors like predisposing, enabling, or reinforcing factors affect athletes and their performances. You can only get so much better per above factors at a given time, day, month, year, Olympic quad, etc. Decisions also have a huge impact on accumulation of training. Accumulation of training is the biggest factor in my mind in terms of developing athletes. Coach-athlete must monitor, evaluate to measure effectiveness of decisions, plans, etc. Rest increases strength or supercompensation, that is, recovery, regeneration. Is cross-training of any benefit to elites? Bill Sands, author of this lecture, says no because of Bondarchuk's reasoning. That is, build muscles not needed for sport. It's a waste of time, etc. So the argument for this particular question is, should elite athletes cross-train. Now, again, elite means top 8 in the world, so you're at the top of the food chain in terms of the rest of the world with regard to, novices and then elite. And there's a huge gap between novices and elite. And if you go back to that model with regard to Bondarchuk and the amount of training prep periods that you would have. So you've got people that have done 10 prep periods, and you've got people that have done 20 prep periods. Ultimately, that could equate to someone that's done 5,000 hours and or someone that's done 10,000 hours towards training. So as you get closer to 10,000 hours of training per this model or per this idea, it's less beneficial for a person to cross-train as they get closer to elite status. Why? Because they feel like you're building the wrong muscles and or you're wasting time that you could be using those muscles more efficiently and effectively and saving time to get better at your sport. I guess what's not necessarily stated there is athletes have a small window of time to actually, get to a certain level. The other side of that argument is father time is undefeated. As we progress and get older, we actually lose some of our physical abilities. We lose time in terms of speed. We lose time in terms of we don't get stronger as we get older. We actually get a little bit weaker, although strength and conditioning can delay that. As we get older, we lose a lot of ability to perform at a high level. So they're suggesting that because that is a fact, we need to pay real close attention to the amount of time that we spend doing anything as we get closer to elite status. What's the relationship between general and specific training? Bill Sands, author, argues there's almost none for elites. Elites need more specific development. When should transfer of earlier phase work be manifest? Sands suggests you will see transfers at the end of the period, which takes patience and time. Have the underlying assumptions of preparation changed? Sands believes they have due to competition calendar or too many competitions. What tasks, transitions, or transfer best and when? Bondarchuk's book, example, he was an Olympic gold and bronze hammer thrower. He surveyed 7,000 athletes in Russia and found that general exercises have lower transition than more specific exercises. There's a place for cross-training. As athletes become more elite, they need less general or cross-training exercises. Coaches can find out what activities correlate transfer well to sport and document measure. Testing to find norms per age can be measured. Basically, you need to find the correlations. Athletes may need different exercises per age, skill, maturity, and training age. Okay, so I actually kind of expounded on that point, and then I gave you more information for what they were talking about. But I would suggest to you listen to this several times so you can really absorb it and understand it. Garden of Performance, Randy Wilbur's Ph.D. model. Training is where you plant seeds. Rest, recovery, nutrition, etc. is what allows garden to grow. That's important too. Training is where or when you plant the seeds. So think of training as the foundation, and then rest, recovery, nutrition, sports psychology, strength and conditioning is what allows the garden to grow. So you need all of those different components, rest and recovery being probably the most too important to allow the training to get to the highest level. Recovery adaptation is what allows plant to bear fruit. That is, plant seed in training, nurture it, then rest, recover for plant to bear fruit. Fiber type may limit athletes' abilities. That is, example of someone born with many large, fast twitch muscle fibers trying to actually become a sprinter or a long distance runner. Now, studies have shown that you can actually change the makeup of your body based on training. But a lot of sports scientists back in the day, USSR, Soviet Union, Russia, and East Germany, they actually, put children and students through sports schools to figure out what was the predominant muscle fiber type. And then based on their predominant muscle fiber type and their ability, they put them in certain sports. Some athletes may be built for sprinting, some for distance running. Athletes training movements, not muscles. Fiber type or fast twitch train muscles. Bodybuilders train muscles. Younger athletes, children, need less intensity due to growth and development of body or physiological development maturity. Sams believes physical markers need to be triangulated with psychological markers. 2 points that I'm going to just stop and kind of go over. That last suggestion there, Sands believes physical markers need to be triangulated with psychological markers. There's a lot of research and or evidence that suggests psychological markers lead into overtraining and or burnout. So although you're doing all of these different measurements with physical markers, you need to also understand that psychological markers have a big impact on the effect and the training design. The last one before that, younger athletes, children need less intensity due to growth and development of body or physiological development and maturity. That is extremely important for people that coach younger athletes. Again, I've already gone over this just a little bit, but I'm going to restate it again because young athletes' bodies are not mature with their minds and or their bodies. So if we put them through the same rigorous type of training that we would put, let's say, a 19 or 20-year-old through, the bodies actually can't handle it. They may actually quit because they don't like what the heck's going on, and physiologically they're just not ready for that. When you're in the beginning stages of any type of training program, let's say 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, the foundation should be fundamentally fun, and you should be teaching them the basics, and they should be having a lot of fun. Per evidence and research, if we put them into intense psychological and physical environments, there's a tendency that they may not be able even to respond to it because they're not ready, and they may actually quit. So that becomes extremely important. So hopefully all of that information made sense to you. Again, this was one of the longer ones, but again, there's a lot of good information into it. I suggest listen to it, several times so that you can get more information and be able to apply it immediately.